First of all, these visiting heads of state coming next week. I suppose just the nightmare of the hierarchy, the dignitaries, getting all these people around who are used to just being, feted and the red carpet rolled out and carriages down the mile. Well, they're going to be told, no private jets. Could you please just sort of turn it? We'll put you in a car park somewhere in West London, and we'll bus you in. I can't imagine that's going to go down very well. But those are the practicalities of basically the entire world's dignitaries turning up to one place at one time to pay their respects to our late Queen.
Yes, indeed, and it's been requested, shall we say, that they don't come in on private jets and state things like Air Force One. But I think that request will probably be rejected by many of these heads of state who are used to this. But certainly when it comes to getting to Westminster Abbey, as you correctly say, getting on that coach, for example, will be something that a lot of these heads of state are not really used to in their lives that they have done. But nonetheless, it is just a logistical nightmare getting so many different people into the centre of London on the day of the funeral. The fact that it is going to be one of the biggest funerals the world has ever seen, and one of the most important funerals the world has ever seen, and so many heads of state jostling a little bit at the moment to try to get extra people, plus ones essentially, wives and husbands and so on, and all of that. Not all of it, because some of it has been worked out already, but some of it still to be worked out. And actually this picture of who does what when and who has the right to do certain things actually extends to the lying in state as well. Parliamentary people who work, staff members, for example, have been told they won't get privileged access. MPs and Lords, yes, they will, but people who work for MPs, for example, who might have got privileged access to see the Queen Mother, for example, when she was on the catafalque her remains were on the catafalque in 2002. Well, that is something that's not going to be extended.
I remember that.
Actually,
I worked in Parliament at the time, and members of the press gallery, there were 200,000 people queuing, and we were told you can have priority. Late at night, one night, you were allowed to sort of to go in and queue and to see the coffin lying in state as it did there. This is going to be very different. This is going to be on a different scale. And by all accounts, Nadeem Sahawi, the Cabinet Office Minister, he was Education Secretary, briefly Chancellor for a few weeks. He is now actually apparently holding daily meetings round the clock, effectively, to try and get everything organised, because they did not predict the numbers correctly for the Queen Mother. It's expected to be far, far, far greater numbers. And just the organisation of this for people to queue up. In reality, you get a lot of people who are elderly, people with families. You need to provide toilet facilities. I mean, it's really basic stuff here. People are going to be overnight. The queue is going to be constantly moving. And therefore people can't camp out. It's not like Wimbledon where people are camping out, but there are going to be people who are collapsing from exhaustion. You need St John's ambulance. This is a huge affair, but it's become, I suppose, something that we just expect happens, and people will want to have their chances, alongside the President of the United States and alongside the royal family themselves and MPs. Ordinary men and women in this country will want their chance to say goodbye to their Queen.
Well, I was down at Buckingham Palace yesterday, Julia, and the queue was 4 hours just to lay flowers. I did not join it, I must say, but lay flowers at the front of Buckingham Palace. And that is, the mood was very solemn, very sombre, and I would imagine that will be repeated around Parliament as well, because, as you say, Nadeem Zahawi, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, he sort of rushed out of the chamber of the House of Commons on Thursday when this news became clear. Certainly his opposite number, Angela Rayner, who's not only the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, but amongst many roles, the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. And this role, which a lot of people don't understand, there's a big coordinating role in that regard, and he's holding these meetings, as you say, every day with the Mayor of London, with all the logistical side of people from so many different organisations, trying to work out how we actually do this. And the fact that there's so many people, I'm sure a lot of viewers and listeners of talkTV know people from right across the UK and beyond who want to be in London at some stage in the next week to pay their respects.
Yeah, exactly. And again, you mentioned all these different meetings, and again, we've got a brand new government. Yes, some people are very experienced. They've been in government, like the Prime Minister has been Foreign Secretary, but as we know, being Prime Minister, very, very different. A brand new Prime Minister, 2 days in the job when this sad news reached us on Thursday. We have a brand new King, obviously, as a result of that. But we also have today starting the new Metropolitan Police Chief, the senior police figure in the country, leading the Metropolitan Force, the largest force in the country country around the London area. He starts, as Mark Rowley starts today. So a lot of new people in these jobs sort of taking over these roles. Let's talk a little bit about what does happen today, because there is going to be an address by the King Charles III, to MPs and peers in Westminster Hall in Parliament at 10 o'clock. And then the King is going to fly to Edinburgh with Camilla, his Queen Consort, to walk behind the coffin from Holyrood to St Giles along the Royal Mile. At 3 o'clock, there will be a service in St Giles. And from 5 o'clock, the public will be able to view the coffin for 24 hours in Edinburgh. The King will then have an audience with Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, and address the Scottish Parliament. Before that, I think it's going to be very moving today, that vigil of the family at St Giles alongside other royals. But crucially here, that the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, will be joining the King for some of this. Now, there was some talk about this was a bit too party political, and she was sort of stepping on his ermine to a certain extent by travelling, going on tour with him. But she's not going on this tour of the United Kingdom with the King, is she? She's just attending the services.
You're right, Julia. She won't do walkabouts essentially with him. She will be at the various services. This is part of one of the operations, Operation Springtide. There have been all sorts of names like Operation London Bridge, the sort of overarching project. But in terms of Operation Springtide, this is the King going to all the constituent parts of the United Kingdom. He'll be in Northern Ireland tomorrow, for example. He'll be in Wales on Friday. And of course, because the Queen very sadly died in Scotland, he is going there for everything you say today, as well as having been in Parliament as well. So it's very important that the King is seen. He is seen in his kingdom. And actually, when you think of the human story behind this, you think of the King and his private grief and the fact that he was so close to his mother, the fact that he is on display and in so many public arenas and having to speak publicly as well. We've heard from him a couple of times already. We're going to hear from him a lot more this week as well. That must be very difficult for him.
Yeah, I mean, just talking of
that is his role.
Yeah, the human side of this, as you say, most of us would be able to grieve in private, in peace, and just with our close loved ones, as opposed to being on display like that. Let's talk though about, Parliament's in recess now after those two special sittings on Friday and Saturday, but we were expecting a major announcement in terms of the sort of mini budget, this fiscal event we've been hearing about next Wednesday week, so on the 21st of September. It would be 2 days after the funeral. We're also moving into party conference season when Parliament is in recess. Liberal Democrats cancelled their conference coming this weekend. Labour and Tory conferences were expected to go ahead, but slightly curtailed with rather less sort of drinking of champagne and karaoke and things like that. But there is a real concern. We are in a cost of living crisis. We are in an economic crisis. We've had that big announcement from Liz Truss. We haven't got any of the details of it. We haven't got the cost of it, the funding of it. Lots of analysis. That just went straight by the wayside upon the news of the death of the Queen. And unfortunately, other lives do carry on, and there are people really struggling right now. Businesses not knowing if they're going to go under or not in the coming weeks. How soon is business of government and business of Parliament going to restart? How long until then?
Well, I think we're going to see Parliament back after the party conferences. There would, of course, have been that conference recess anyway. Parliament was due to rise.
I thought there was some talk of actually not having a recess during party conferences.
There was, but it never really came to anything. But certainly on Thursday this week, Parliament was due to rise again for conference recess. The thing is, at conferences, obviously the Liberal Democrats not having theirs, as you say, but at Labour and especially the Conservative conference, we're going to get new policy. We're going to hear what the government is going to do. But it is a long time for people to wait. But nonetheless, because the nation is grieving, because this is unprecedented, really, in most people's lives, in terms of a monarch dying, there is an acceptance, I suppose, that Parliament is in recess, and also that politics and daily the sort of cut and thrust of politics is essentially suspended. You say this, and people will say this, and the media says this. I keep hearing this is what everyone accepts, the nation of mourning. Actually, most people are going to work. Most people, their children are going to school. People can grieve and respect, but they also need to know that they can pay their heating bill. They also need to know that they can not have to close their business down in a month's time. I think people can take some reassurance from the fact that, yes, this is a new government, but actually this period, this quiet period of politics not being at the forefront, actually will involve a lot of new ministers having the time to not hit the ground running, to actually have time to read into their briefs, to have meetings with senior civil servants, to get to know their departments and to get to know what they're meant to be doing in a slightly quieter way. The work of government will continue behind the scenes. There'll be a lot of work at the Treasury and so on.
Peter Caldwell, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you.